Thank you for joining us. My name is Colleen, and you are here watching the Individuals with Disability Education Act, Understanding Special Education. This is part 3 of the IEP. Just a disclaimer, the PACER Center is not a legal services agency and does not provide any legal advice or legal representation. The content of this presentation and related materials are for informational and educational purposes only. It is not legal advice and should not be used as a substitute for legal advice. And my name is Colleen. I am a parent trainer and advocate here at PACER. I've been here just about 2 years. I have 3 kiddos, 2 of whom have disabilities, and they've been on IEP since they were 3. I have sat in special education meetings both as a parent and as an educator. I learned the importance of knowing my rights and how to be prepared for advocating for my child's needs.
And my name is Robbie Weil. I came to PACER after over 30 years as a teacher, primarily 4th and 5th grade. And I have watched Colleen advocate for her children. I did not know my rights when my now adult children were on IEPs. And I thought I understood the process. And I went home my first month at PACER in tears, like I would have done it differently, which is why I so strongly tell parents we don't know what we don't know. And there's no shame in that at all. You're here to learn and move forward. And that's why I'm so passionate about getting this information out. So PACER Center is Minnesota's parent training and information center, and it was started following the passage of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We opened our doors in 1978. There was a staff of 5. I believe they were meeting in somebody's basement, and one project, and that project was Parents Helping Parents. And the goal was to empower Minnesota parents and guardians with the knowledge to be an equal member of their child's IEP team. We support families in being active, collaborative, and equal members of that team by knowing their rights and understanding their options. Please be sure to read through the handout that you received as part of your resource materials that explains what we do and what we don't do in that role. It's also linked, I think it's linked in the reminder that you should have gotten right before this started. Excuse me. Since then, we have grown. We have a staff of about 75, and we offer more than 30 programs. You can read more about all of these programs on our website, www.pacer.org. From birth through a child's 22nd birthday and then transitioning into adulthood, PACER works hard to partner with parents of students with disabilities. Through it all, our mission remains the same: to enhance the quality of life and for children and young adults with disabilities and their families. So just to clarify again, each state has a parent training and information center. That's because there's the federal law, and then each state has the ability to create statutes that may tweak things like timelines or due dates. If you are not from Minnesota, you're welcome to stay, of course, and some of this could be relevant, but you can always go to the Parent Hub. If you look up either the Center for Parent Information and Resources or Parent Hub, it will bring you to this site, and highlighted in yellow is the button that you would click to get information about the center in your state. Please be aware, especially when you do the evaluation, this workshop is geared for Minnesota parents and guardians. If you serve in another role, that's awesome, and we're glad you're here to learn, but that is who our focus is today.
So our presentation today is the last of our 3-part series on understanding special education. In our last 2 presentations, we discussed the process and rights and evaluation and eligibility. Today's presentation, the IEP, is intended to give an overall understanding of the purpose of special education, its place within general education, the principles of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the process, and the role of parents and guardians. But your learning doesn't need to end with this series. Our next workshops include the special education paperwork and the prior written notice on October 10th, and effective communication with the IEP team on October 24th.
You should find a questions panel on your screen, and you can use that to submit general questions that you have for us along the way. Again, we have a lot of people in attendance. We are trying to my computer is going crazy. Sorry about that. Again, with that questions panel, go ahead and put your questions in. We do try to answer them as we go, and typically we do have time at the end. Please remember that we can only answer general questions. If you have very specific questions, don't know why my computer is doing this. We suggest that you call us directly. So you've already seen them. I'll just stay there. Here are the learning targets for today. What are the required parts of the IEP? What are the goals, services, and accommodations? And what is the importance of a PWN? I just want to mention about the questions as well. Please know that today we are focusing on the IEP. And that will be what we will center our questions on. We do have other resources if you're having issues with your school. Very specific questions we can answer, you can contact us directly. Otherwise, our workshop about effective communication would be a good place to get that information. And that's a reference to that question. We probably will not go into detail today about how to work with a school when you're struggling. Can only do so much.
So the parts of the IEP. The IEP is the plan, a contract between all members of the team, school, and family as to the actions that will be taken over the course of a 12-month period. It is the culmination of the evaluation process. We could spend our time together reading to you our Pacer's Guide to the IEP for Minnesota parents, but honestly, that would be boring and take hours. You will get a copy of that with your resources and that you receive following this presentation. Reading it will kind of flesh out the items that we will be touching on today. While developing the IEP, together the team will take into consideration evaluation data, present levels of performance, strengths of the child, parent concerns, state and district-wide assessment results, and special factors such as assistive technology, behavior, English proficiency, vision and hearing impairment, and communication. There is no common form that districts are required to use, but every IEP will contain specific sections as to the content. The general information section of the IEP includes important things to know, such as the date of the last evaluation, date of the IEP, the disability category that your child qualified under, grade, and case manager. The next section, the progress report, typically references how many times a year and when you can expect to see something that's similar to a report card, but it is very specific to the IEP goals only. The purpose of the present level statement is to describe what your child can do at the time the IEP is developed. The information should be presented clearly with enough information to describe your child's present skill levels. The statement should identify specific skills or behaviors requiring instruction and should also include their strengths. From 9th grade on, or before if determined necessary by the team, their IEP will continue to address needs in the performance areas as described. However, at this stage, those needs will be linked to the following transition areas, like post-secondary education and training, employment, independent living, when it is appropriate. This may include recreation and leisure, community participation, and home living. The IEP team, which now includes your child, will develop measurable post-secondary goals in the areas of education, employment, and when appropriate, independent living. Schools have the obligation to meet your child's needs in what is considered the least restrictive environment possible. In other words, maximizing time alongside typically developing peers with the appropriate services and supports to make progress. This part of the IEP is a statement about the level. The resources you will receive following this workshop will contain more information. The accountability and assessment section reflects any changes or accommodations your child may need when they participate in state-mandated testing. It is very important to know that when your child turns 18, they become their own guardian. And I think that statement terrifies me every time I say it. If you believe that your child will need guardianship, that is a process that should be addressed by their 17th birthday.
And then because of their importance, and somebody already had a question about goals, we're about to jump in there. We're going to go a little deeper in discussing goals and services and accommodations, which are additional parts of the IEP. So let's talk a little bit about goals. And somebody asked the question, does Minnesota use SMART goals? That's like saying, do you use Kleenex or Puffs? The purpose of a goal is to look at a child's need, where they are, and where you would like them to be. I can't even remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but we're going to talk about how that fits together. The first thing that it should address is what skill or behavior needs to change or be learned or taught. Is this a goal to improve written expression, cooperative interaction with peers, or identifying and regulating big emotions? A goal should include also the direction of change. So for example, are they going to increase their use of complete sentences, or is the goal to decrease the use of incomplete phrases, both of which have the same end result? We do suggest that you watch for goals of compliance. Again, you should be able to read your child's goal and understand what your child is learning or what skill they are gaining. Um, you know, compliance can be the outcome, and that's where we see goals such as, we'll follow directions 4 out of 5 times the first at first request. The question there is, what is the skill the child is learning? And that's really unclear in that statement. What does the child need? Is this a communication skill? Do they need to learn how to process that information? What is standing in their way? When you meet needs through services and goals, often those behaviors then diminish. Another thing that you want to look at is, where are they now? And again, that relates back to the present level. So you've done the evaluation that has to be done every 3 years, but yearly you check in. They're not quite where they were when we did the evaluation. Where are they now? Because remember that evaluation is about, or covers the next 3 years. So every year the present levels kind of tweak that. Um, and again, this sometimes people will say, isn't this kind of a shortened version of the evaluation? And yes, it kind of is. Another thing would be, what can the child reasonably achieve in the span of 12 months? Remember, the IEP does not run for the course of the school year. It'd be a nightmare for teachers if they all started and renewed in September. So depending on when your child was first evaluated and found eligible and the IEP is written, that becomes your yearly review date. And the goal is written for the course of that 1 year. Based on the information that the team has about the child, how they learn, their area of disability, what level of the skill is reasonable to meet in the course that this IEP is in place the following 12 months. It should include how the performance will be measured. And that's when we talk about SMART or any other acronym, the thing you want to be able to know is, how are we measuring this? This might be information about what skills will be watched for, how that progress is being monitored. It typically will not say specifically what tools are being used, but you should be able to see how it's being measured. And then, what are the steps or objectives to accomplish that goal? Minnesota continues to require at least two short-term objectives or benchmarks for each goal. Talk about that in just a second. Colleen, are there any questions we can answer here while we're going? Or keep those for the end?
Sorry, I didn't realize I muted. There are a couple, just in regards to the previous slide about the transfer
Oh,
of rights.
yep.
And does it really take a year to do the guardianship? And I would say yes, that it is an extensive process that is done outside of the school. So school can kind of get you started, but it does take about a year for that process. And that's what that transfer of rights means, is that you're transferring your right as being on the IEP team to now your child. So if you do not do guardianship, your child takes control of the IEP when they turn 18. That's about it.
So let's take a little bit about measurable annual goals. So again, we talked about what skill or behavior needs to change. And here you have, going from top to bottom, 2 examples of goals that might be put in place. So the skill may be to write a paragraph, as in the first column. The present level is that right now this student is using incomplete phrases. They're not creating a full sentence. Then the next step is what is the reasonable goal in the course of a year? And they are hoping that this child, and again, this is a bit of a hypothesis. You have to remember that the team, including you and the professionals, look at where the child is. They think about where can the child be, and then we'll talk about services in a minute, but it's a hypothesis. Can they get here, and what services do they need? Do we think they need to get there? I joke with parents all the time that it would be nice if kids were like cars and you plugged them into computers and it all lit up, and this child needs 30 minutes of this time 5 times a week to get to this point in 12 months, and that's not how it works. And then again here, how is this going to be measured? Well, in this case, they're going to be measuring their reading journal, I'm assuming every day, maybe they have a prompt, and making sure that they're on track. They're reaching toward being able to do 4 out of 5 times in the course of the week, that they have the 3 complete grammatical topic sentences on the same topic. Sorry, stumbling over my words here. And then the other one similarly. The behavior that needs to be changed is this child needs to learn, or is going to be taught, how to recognize when they need a break, to take it and come back. The present level is that they don't ask for that break. And the reasonable achievement at the end of the year is that 8 out of 10 times over the course of a month, they will be able to do that. And again, there's going to be some form of data tracking that the teacher is going to create. Clearly, a child doesn't jump from the present level to that reasonable achievement. Like, I could not run a marathon tomorrow. I would have to break it down to what are the steps that I would need to take. I'm not going to take them. But in any event, the child is going to walk through some objectives. For example, in the first column, this child may need to first work on staying on a topic when they're writing. Another objective might be working towards appropriate grammar, punctuation. And then the last objective, excuse me, would be to be able to put that all together in a paragraph. Again, this doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes these objectives are worked on concurrently, and sometimes they're like steps towards the ultimate goal. I'm just going to take a drink.
So there is a relationship between the goals in your child's IEP and the special education and related services that the school provides. For example, if your child with a learning disability has a goal to improve reading by 1 grade level, then services provided by the licensed learning disability staff to help your child accomplish the goal during the current IEP year will be listed in this section of the IEP. Direct services are provided by a licensed special education teacher or a related services professional who instructs your child. This section of the IEP will include the amount of time to provide that instruction of service. So usually it's in increments of minutes. Frequency of services, so the number of times per week or month. The starting date and expected duration for the services. The location of where the services will be provided, such as in the regular or special education classroom, home or other setting. Indirect services are provided by a special education teacher or related services professional working with other professionals or with the parents. These services could include consultation, modifications of curriculum for the child, observation of the child, or cooperative planning. The services are provided on behalf of your child and not directly to your child. This area of the IEP identifies services such as accommodations, assistive technology, and paraprofessional support. The services support the child in the classroom as well as in non-academic and extracurricular activities. Supplemental aids and services enables a child to participate with children without disabilities. Accommodations level the playing field so a child can demonstrate knowledge without lowering or changing the standard or the level of the classwork or of a test. Supplemental aids and services enable a child to participate with children without disabilities. Modifications lower or change the level of difficulty or focus of classwork or of a test. Staff may need support, such as additional training or consultation with someone who can suggest ways to support the child in the general education classroom. Assistive technology can be key, and it must give clear directions to staff.
And then, of course, we talked about last week, and we will always stress the importance of the prior written notice. Following the development of the IEP, you will receive a copy. It is often marked as a draft, and it comes with your best friend, the prior written notice. As at any other time, read the document carefully. Reach out to the team if you have any questions. Call to speak with a PACER advocate if you need some clarification. We have a review process, and I believe that that's in your resources, that an advocate may want you to go through and then discuss with you before you sign. This is a way to compare the needs identified in the evaluation with the services and make sure that they're lining up, that the needs that you prioritized are being addressed. Again, the prior written notice, the district needs to use that. It should lay out what is being proposed. Attached, you will find. It should include other options that were discussed. We discussed decreasing social skills minutes, but based on current need, have increased it. And then, of course, it will say we chose this option because our data showed, and then it would explain that. The second part of this form is the parental consent or objection form. And again, it is really important to know that there is a timeline for this. If some of you are here and you are in the process of going through an initial evaluation or an initial IEP, this isn't really pertinent, but it is important to know that going forward, anytime you are given a prior written notice, you actually don't have to consent. If you don't like something in it, you need to object by checking the box and returning the form. And the reason that is because on day 15, if they haven't received your objection, then they're assuming that you like what is in writing. One of the saddest things that I hear are parents who say, well, I haven't signed the IEP for the last 3 years because I haven't been happy with it. And I have to say, you might as well have, put a big gold star on it because you agreed to it. Again, we always suggest that you sign it and make a copy and keep it. Different districts, again, have different forms. That's something we'd love to see changed in the state, but right now they each have a different computer program and a different form. There will always be at least one box, that says that you consent. And even though you don't need to do it, I think it's a good habit to get into. Then you've got the paperwork. There will always be at least one box that says, I object. I think this is the clearest, the districts that have 3 specific boxes. One says, I don't agree, and a request a conciliation conference to be held. That needs to be held within 10 days. And that's one of the alternative dispute resolution methods. What I talk with parents about is how easy is this ask? Did you discuss something that you're just not seeing reflected? Did you talk about 3 times a week and it says 2? You could also say that you don't agree and just ask to talk with the appropriate members of the child's team. I have also had parents who will just call the case manager and say, was this a misprint? And they say, yep, it was. Sorry, we'll change that and get that back to you. Again, we also have a workshop coming up in October where we're specifically going to go over the prior written notice as well as some of the other important paperwork. what to keep and what not to keep, so you don't end up like me when your kids move out and you have boxes of IEPs and all sorts of unnecessary data.
So before we finish, we want you to know two things. First, we appreciate you being here. We love helping guardians navigate a complex system where they are expected to be an equal team member without any idea how to do that. Second, everything we do is free to parents and guardians of children with disabilities. A large part of that is funding through grants. In order to continue receiving grant money, we need to report to our grantors that we are fulfilling our obligations. So we need your help. Following the presentation, you will receive an email. It will include resources, a form if you are in need of CEUs, but most importantly, an evaluation. Not only do those evaluations help us continue to be funded, but we also take your feedback very seriously. We often make changes to presentations or add topics based on what you share. They are very short and the survey shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to do. So if we have helped you today, please help us out by completing it. Thank you. So I think if you're ready, Robbie, there's quite a few questions
Yes. There's a question here about the FBA. And again, I'm going to refer back. We talked about that last week. It is discussed in the guide of FBA is not technical. FBA is functional behavioral assessment when a child is struggling with behaviors. It's a tool that can be used to try to see if there's a pattern. What are the antecedents to the behaviors so that proactive supports can be put in place. That is not what, because I'm not sure what the question is here. If you're referring to teacher observations towards meeting a goal, that would not be how that would be used. That would probably be either part of the evaluation process, or if a child has new behaviors, that can also be done as a standalone.
There is a question on here about accommodations. Can something be added as an accommodation if what you are requesting goes against district policy? And right there, it says if you're going against district policy, you're not going to get far. I'm sorry. At that point, I would be requesting a team meeting to discuss, what accommodation are you thinking of, and can the team get closer together in some kind of arrangement, again, some kind of compromise in regards to what you are asking. But there also has to be a need. Your child needs to be showing that there is a need for this accommodation in order for it to be put into their IEP.
And I'm just going to add in here that this is an area that I think we're seeing a lot of right now with schools who are banning phones.
Mhm.
And parents are calling, my child is panicking, they need to have their phone. And if that's the school's policy and they are doing it equitably, then you have, like Colleen said, you ask for meeting and you discuss what is the child's need. The child needs to know that they can get in touch with a parent when they need to, or the child, whatever that is. And then you get creative about what other options are available. Whether that's, I don't know, I'm not even going to take a guess, but this is one that I think we've seen several calls about. My school has a new policy regarding phones that increases my child's anxiety. So the issue isn't, can we break the rules for my child, but how are we going to accommodate that? Let's go down. I'm going to answer the one about direct services and indirect services. So there's a specific question here that has to do with a high school student. And, if this class focuses on skill or team building, can that be used as social skills? It's important to know that what you see in the grid are special education minutes, and those minutes need to be provided by a special educator in some area. So when a child has a social skills goal, then you talk about how are we going to meet those minutes. Direct can be in the classroom. A person can come in and work directly with the student. That's still direct if it's a licensed provider meeting with the child in some way, supporting them. Indirect minutes have not, it's not, are we indirectly talking about that? Indirect minutes mean that the special educator is conferring with other staff as to how to support the student. When I was teaching, I saw this most often in the area of speech, where I would meet weekly or bi-weekly with a speech teacher to talk about what the skills they were working on, what sound pronunciations I should ignore, and how to support corrections in other areas. And again, an elective that has a description of team building, social, interaction does still not count as those minutes. That might lead to a discussion whether those minutes are necessary at this time to meet the goal.
So there is a question in here regarding PE. Since physical education is part of the definition of special education in federal IDEA law, I assume PE has to be addressed in IEP meetings and on the IEP document. Is that correct? Again, it always comes back down to need. Does your child have a need in regards to physical education? Are they able to participate alongside their typical peers? Do they need support or accommodations while attending PE? Those are all conversations to be having with your IEP team. But it comes down to the needs of the child. What did the evaluation show, and the needs that the child is currently displaying?
There's a question here, and I think we talk with a lot of parents. And I myself was in that position where there is a divorce and there may or may not be shared joint legal custody. And that legal custody is about this decision making, which is very separate from physical custody. In my case, I had sole physical custody, but we shared joint legal custody. The schools, and the question here is, can an IEP be stepped down to a 504? That's really not what the process is. If a child has been evaluated and they qualify for an IEP, they're found eligible, then the school is obligated to provide those services unless the guardians revoke it. When you have two people who have legal custody and are in disagreement, that is putting the school in a very difficult position. And I have had parents who have had to go back to their mediator or to work through an attorney to decide about those decisions. I've had cases where one parent signs an evaluation consent form and the other parent calls in and says, I don't agree to this. And the school is bound to follow what both of them are saying, and that's not possible. So if at all possible, try to work it out. Think about what is needed. If the school has done the evaluation, the child is eligible and proposes an IEP, you can revoke those services. And in that case, you might discuss a 504. But again, remember, they're very different in what they do. A 504 only offers accommodations to access education. It's like, giving a stool so you can see over the fence, if you've seen that picture that we used earlier. Whereas the IEP says, here are skill areas where there are deficits or needs, and this is how we're going to instruct the child so they can make progress in their goals as well as the educational goals of the school and the curriculum. Difficult situation.
There is a question in here in regards to accommodations. Can accommodations be updated on an IEP? Do I have to set up a team meeting with the school? So, usually when you have your IEP meeting once a year, accommodations are addressed then. The team discuss, what accommodations are needed. If you are finding that your child, as you start a new school year, needs new accommodations, if something is missing, you reach out to your child's case manager and see kind of what they would recommend. Is it something simple that can be added? Then they would send you a new IEP and a prior written notice that goes with it. Or is it something that the whole team needs to discuss if it's a bigger accommodation or something that they're not quite sure of? Have an IEP team meeting, have all the key players come to the table and have that discussion.
Okay. There's another one here about one-on-ones, and this is a call we get a lot. My child needs one person supporting them at different times during the day, a paraprofessional, separate from any services they met. Again, you don't qualify for a one-on-one. So let's talk about a couple different ways that this can look. There is a section, and we didn't mention it, but there is often a line in the IEP that says child-specific paraprofessional. Typically, that means, does your child need somebody with them all day in order to manage the day? This might be because they have physical needs and need their wheelchair pushed. Um, there are different ways that that can look, but I I have not worked with many families where that box is checked. The child needs a one-on-one paraprofessional for the day. So again, this isn't about how do I qualify for that. This goes back to, what does your child need? If your child is fine during morning meeting and reading time and they don't need any support, they don't have needs in that area, then they don't need any support there. If your child has sensory needs and when they go to PE, they get highly agitated and need somebody to help them regulate, then you talk about who will support my child in that class. And there might be a discussion about having a paraprofessional at certain times of the day. For example, if a child has a disability and has goals around writing, they may go out of the room to get their special education minutes, but, and this is an example I am picturing many times in my class. I had students who, because of their high level of need in writing, somebody would come in with them so they could dictate maybe, or to help them use close paragraphs where they only had to fill in certain lines. So again, this is all based on what does your child need and when. I think as parents, we say, oh my gosh, my kid needs help. Can somebody just help them all day? But remember, this is a balance of what do they need and how do they get supported and what times do they need that. Anything you want to add?
No,
Did I hit it?
nope, nope. The common theme I keep hearing is what is your child showing? What do they need? What are their educational needs? I feel like that just that's the underlying cause.
Yeah.
There was one here, I think it was kind of lumped into two questions, but in regards to those goals, how are they measured? And the question here is measured by teacher observations. What are the types of tools used to collect the data? Is it an informal observational notes and or specific checklist? If it's not specified on the IEP, then it's that person's choice of how they are collecting the data. As long as they are collecting the data as required in the IEP, that's all that matters. If it is very specific, such as, again, a checklist, or is it informal observations? But what it would say under the goal and then the objective is how is it being collected? And that's what the staff is being held to. So whoever is in charge of that goal, they're the ones collecting the data. That's how they're responsible for it. But it's up to them if it's not specified.
So I'm going to just answer one brief one about subs, and then I'm going to address there are a couple more questions about paraprofessionals. In between my retiring from teaching and coming to Pacer, I served as a substitute, and I would always be shocked, when I would get calls for special education roles. And I'm like, I'm not qualified, but I was qualified to be a substitute. So when a teacher is out, there are two different ways that schools approach that. And you have to look at the reality that sometimes you put out a call for sub and you don't get one. The other thing that I will tell you is that when I served in that role, I was holding space. I didn't have those qualifications. You can ask that question, how the school handles that. For some kids, that routine of being taken out at that time is really important, and that may kind of override whether they're actually getting good services. During that time, sometimes professionals leave really excellent sub plans that do support the child in what they're working on. And sometimes the school will, and I have seen some districts that actually write in, this many days, if there is no substitute, will be made up. So lots of different ways that can be written in. There's no one answer. There's a couple more questions here about paraprofessionals. How many should a class have? And what is their interaction with parents? There's no number. Again, this is driven by the needs of the children in the room. So there may be ratios about special education rooms. I think those are district set, not state set. I think that there are some thresholds for caseloads, for example, for speech pathologists. But again, that's way above the detail of what we typically need to know. When it comes to, I will just tell you, Colleen has the most beautiful relationship with some of her paras and her kids' paras, and it's beautiful to see. And some schools allow that, and some schools have policies that don't allow that. And again, it goes back to the question, can I ask for something that goes against the policy? No, you can't. I don't know why some schools make that decision. It could be that they feel that it's better to have one point person. You have to remember that that paraprofessional is often talking and interacting with the case manager. And for efficiency and clarity, they may feel that it's more important that that be the point person. I wish I could tell you why schools do a lot of things, and I have been in different schools where I start to understand their decision. May not be the decision I would have made, but if you have concerns about that, if you believe that the para is the one that can give you very specific information, you could be asking for a communication log where they jot down data that you're looking for. But that's a discussion to be had with the team.
So Robbie, there was a kind of a question here, a little bit in regards to eligibility, but also kind of tied into the IEP. So I was going to try to answer that one. If a child could be eligible under a different educational label, does it matter and which is chosen? What criteria would you use to select a label? We touched a lot on eligibility last week. There are 13 areas that a child can qualify under, such as deaf and hard of hearing, autism. So it's coming down to the need that your child is showing, right? So is there a medical diagnosis? The team decides when you first evaluate for special education, what umbrella are we looking at? Are we, if your child is not deaf and hard of hearing, well, then we're not going to do that qualification. We're not going to do all that testing. So, it is very specific. And they're not really educational labels. That's kind of it's really more of that criteria. How is your child qualifying for special education? Not how are they being labeled for special education? That qualification. And again, it just kind of looks at, okay, if your child is qualifying under ASD, these are the needs that your child is showing. So again, the needs fall under that criteria. These are the needs that your child has. This is how we're going to evaluate. What I would say is if you have a new medical diagnosis, if you haven't had one, if something new has popped up, and that is an area that is a way to qualify in Minnesota, such as you have a new diagnosis of autism, you didn't have one prior, then that's something you want to discuss with your team to say, okay, maybe we need to look at that. Is that on his IEP? Do we need to look at that for an evaluation? Having a new medical diagnosis is a reason to really look at your evaluation. I hope I answered that, what you were looking for.
And I will just add one little thing because of my own personal perspective here. There is, and we talked about this when we talked about the categories last week, and I know that some of you were not able to be here. There is the EBD category, emotional and behavioral disability. And that is a very appropriate category that many children qualify, including one of my own, qualified under. And then you have the autism spectrum disability category, which, by the way, you don't need a diagnosis for. There are many kids with that diagnosis that don't qualify in that category, and many without the diagnosis that do. The difference there, and there is actually a clause in the law that talks about the EBD category not being used if the needs are a result of autism, sensory processing. There are a few other things listed. And I think the only reason that that becomes important is it's about the lens. Again, we talk about the categories as doors into the special education closet. Once you've opened the closet, everything is there. The lens of EBD says that the behavior is the concern. And so goals are going to be around modifying that behavior in general. When a child has sensory needs or is on the spectrum. Many of those behaviors come from an inability to express other needs. And once those needs are identified and met, look, the behaviors are diminishing or disappearing. And so that's the only time where, I talk with parents about thinking through what makes the most sense for your child.
There's a question on here regarding the case manager. Is that usually a special education teacher? When you look on your child's IEP on that very first page, it would identify who the case manager is. It varies. If your child has a speech only IEP, then most likely the case manager could be a speech pathologist. It can be the special education teacher that they have the most contact with during the day. Again, due to caseloads and how schedules roll out, sometimes a child might see one special ed teacher for one subject and another on another subject. And it's one of those two who would be the case manager. Again, it comes down to caseloads for those individual special education teachers. But your case manager would be listed on the very front page of your IEP. It does change pretty much every school year who your case manager is, especially when you're changing schools. So if you are unsure of who your child's case manager is by now, I would be reaching out to the school to find out who your child's case manager is for the year, just so that you know who your point person will be.
So there's a question about field trips. That can be addressed in the IEP. Your child has the right to attend field trips that are part of the curriculum. If you think that there is concern that your child may struggle, then I would absolutely be bringing that up at a meeting, and that can be put in. There are sections, obviously we couldn't go through every section, but there's a section of the IEP, and again, the guide will lay this all out, that talks about extracurriculars, about field trips, and if this is a child who would need support for a field trip, then that can be written in, and they have the right to be there, just like they have the right to be included in the rest of the curriculum. And because you were told they didn't have the resources, then they need to get creative, because if it's in there and the child needs that support to participate, then they're going to have to figure out how they're going to restructure that day.
There's a question here about IEP goals. How are they organized by class, by different areas of development? So your IEP goals, it comes down to the needs that are identified in your child's evaluation. So if your child has an identified need with gross motor skills, then the OT would be the one responsible for, well, one, qualifying the child, saying that there's a need with these motor skills, coming up with a goal, and then what are the objectives around that goal? So it comes down to the areas of need that were identified in the evaluation, and it doesn't go by any particular order when you look at your IEP. So whether you have one goal or 5 or 7 in some cases, it's not arranged in any particular order. They're all listed there. That's how that works.
Potty training. Typically the school does not, they can be supportive of that. But Colleen, you might, and you work in early childhood
I worked in
too.
early childhood, and I had 2 boys who struggle with toilet training. What I would say is it's not that they execute potty training. They do not take that on in full form. It's more of like that PCA support that a child qualifies for when they're at school. So the para fills that role of helping with toileting needs. It's up to the para and the case manager and you if you want particular language to be used when it's time to go to the bathroom, if there is a particular routine that, they can attempt to follow just to kind of work on those skills, but they don't necessarily work on that skill. It's not really part of, I really don't see it as part of an IEP. It's more of how do you want it supported when they're at school? Many times they go to the nurse's office to get changed. There's a toilet in there and the kids can practice, they can talk it through. There could be a sticker chart, again, kind of depending on where you are in the process and your child as well. Again, they can kind of support some methods, again, those reward charts and whatnot, but they're not going to fully take on toilet training.
So I clicked on two here. One's a quick answer and the other one spoke to my passion, and I clicked before I realized I was taking all the questions from clean. When you say, what if the IEP has been completed and you have new questions and concerns because you've been processing? I believe that's why there's that wise window of time. You get the IEP, you do not have to sign it for 14 days. Remember, on day 15, if you don't sign it, you've said it's perfect. So if there's something in there that concerns you, you need to share that objection either by just a quick call to the case manager. If that doesn't get a change, then you can either think about a conciliation conference or just a team meeting. But use that time. And I go back to what I mentioned earlier about the review process we have called From Needs to Services. And if I forgot to put it in the resource, you can easily find it on our website. If I were to go back and raise my kids again, I would be using that process every year when I get the new IEP to review it and make sure that, yep, it's what I think makes sense right now. Um, you know, schools are busy. If you sign it and then the next day call and say, no, I want to change it. Now you have a whole new process. Use that time to really think about, is this evaluation really understanding my child's needs? Is this IEP our best attempt to create goals and services to meet towards them? Because that 2-week window is going to maintain your relationship with the team, as opposed to signing it in the meeting and then calling a week later and saying, yeah, I don't like this. So use that time. It's there for a very wise reason. This question about people who cast a negative shadow on IEPs, and you're going to be, now everybody has a bias and negative assumptions about a child. I think that was true maybe in the 1980s and 90s. When I grew up, this was before IDEA, I didn't see children in school who were different than me. Well, that's not true. There were children in school who may have been neurodiverse. They may have had a learning disability, but there was nothing to support them. And so they were the bad kids, they were the naughty kids, they were in the office, they dropped out at 16, right? Because they weren't supported, and it was a miserable, miserable experience. I think all of a sudden you had this law that said everybody has a right to education in the least restrictive environment. What does that look like? And then you had this perspective of, oh, you're a special ed kid. I would like to think that we are in an age here that is changing. We all have differences. We all have needs, and we all have the right to have those supported, as do children. When a child doesn't have, let's say they have a deficit in the area of social skills, and maybe they are on the autism spectrum, maybe they're not, and they have been found eligible. If you don't work on those skills, that gap is going to continue to grow and potentially cause, I would say, bigger issues than the perspective of you are getting special education services. I will also tell you, if that is a concern, it can be addressed. And I will also tell you that I am seeing wonderful, wonderful things on the internet. I know that when I taught, I started one of my early lessons at morning meeting early on in the year was to bring in a box of glasses and say, oh, 3 of us have glasses, so you all get to choose a pair, right? Because it's only fair that we all have glasses. Otherwise, it's not fair. I do, you don't. And of course, 4th graders were like, what are you talking about? And that leads to that discussion about we all have different needs and we all have the right to have those met. I truly believe that children who have special needs that don't get services has a long-term effect. I wouldn't work here if I didn't think that was true.
Robbie, the person with toilet training just had a clarifying question I wanted to back up
Oh, go
to.
ahead.
They wanted to talk about, does it qualify under self-help skills? This is really something that you would want to talk about with your IEP team of what you are. Toilet training can be such a very think about what your expectations are. If you are under the impression that the school is going to come in and fully potty train your child, that's different. If anything, this is something that you would want to be on the same page with the para support that you are having and your case manager as to, again, how are you doing it at home? Because they want to be consistent. So yes, it can be considered a self-help skill, but thinking about what are your expectations and what does your child need? What can the team be doing? It's all, again, it's a conversation that you should be having with your IEP team.
And then we are at 12:57.
Yeah.
Back to that question about how to work with schools that are resistant. Come to our workshop in October, focusing on how you communicate with the team, or call us. I tell parents, call before there's a problem. Call the first time somebody says special education, because the more you know about the process, the smoother it's gonna go, and small problems can stay small. If you are in the process and when there's this sense that the school is being resistant, we can help you through that and teach you some of these skills at the same time. Um, so that I think that would be the best way to address that. We both tell parents, um, you're in business. You're in a business partnership with the school. They have the expertise on pedagogy and curriculum. You have the expertise on your child, and together you are working, and the product is the best education for your child. Um, and if you're running like a store as a business, you know that if your business partners aren't in sync, you have to meet and talk about that. You can ignore it, but that's not going to go well. And in this case, it's not a store folding, it's your child not getting what they need. So learning to do that is, I think, vitally important to all of this.
I think we should just mention that if you are looking for more specific information when you call PACER, be very specific as to your child's age and disability. That kind of helps field calls a little bit faster for us, especially as this is getting to be our busy time of year. So having that information would really be helpful to an advocate to kind of fill out the calls or emails faster.
I'm just going to answer the one last one before we say goodbye. And I'm realizing we should probably put this into the body.
Yeah.
If you are objecting through the use
Yeah.
of the PWN, you send it to the person whose name is on there typically, or the case manager, but often there's a name. Sometimes it's somebody who runs the paperwork in bigger districts especially. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for Colleen for always doing this with me.
Yeah, it's fun. And hopefully we'll see you guys in October for effective communication with your IP team and the paperwork workshop as well.
Awesome. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.